Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to make 4 cute, spooky, fun Halloween crafts. And here's craft number 1. So the first thing you need is a plastic carvable pumpkin. This came from Michael's last year, but I know they have them every year. And some black and orange and a little brown acrylic paint. And all I did was paint sort of alternating sections of the pumpkin, first with the black. And once the black had dried, I did the orange in the other alternating sections. So I just wanted to do one coat. So I did sort of a thicker coat to make sure that it did a fairly even coat. One thing that might be easier to do is to give the whole thing a coat of something like a primer, either all white or all orange, but I didn't want to do that. So I just did this very carefully and then sort of smoothed out the rougher edges. And did the alternating orange until the whole thing was striped orange and black. I did a little bit of brown on the stem because I did not like the way the stem looked, just to give it a little more of a darker color to contrast it a little bit with the orange and black. Next, I took some twine and I made a hanger. And so I made a loop to put over the stem, and then I tied a little bow and a knot. So I'm also going to hot glue this because the twine does not actually hold itself together very well. So the hot glue will keep it together better. And then I took some small ornaments that looked Halloween-y and kind of matched what I wanted to do. And I'm going to make a string of them that will sit along the edge, front edge of the pumpkin. So the other thing I found with the stem was that the twine itself looked sort of... So I didn't like the way the twine looked. I thought it looked kind of harsh against the orange and black. So I'm going to paint the twine with a little bit of the brown that I used on the stem, just to make it look more roughed up, a little rustic, and not so bright twine colored. So I also took this small button and painted it brown. I'm going to put it on top of the bow once I have attached everything else. So then I started hot gluing. And as I was hot gluing, I realized that I didn't want to do it right on the pumpkin. So I set it on this little cup so that I would have room to work. And at first I was going to try stringing the ornaments through the twine, but it was really hard to get them through the small opening. So I decided just to hot glue them onto the string. So as you can see, it's a little obstreperous, but I didn't want to put it right on the paper because then the hot glue would stick to the paper and I would get paper everywhere. So I sort of picked it up and held it while it was setting up and add a little more glue as I needed, and then I just held it. And while the glue was hardening for the last ornament, I decided to add a little banner that I was going to put underneath the button. And I made that out of a popsicle stick. So I just cut a little piece of popsicle stick. First I cut one end flat, and then I cut a little dovetail type shape, just using scissors. These are pretty thin popsicle sticks. And then I painted it orange and added the weeest bit of sort of brown to the edges so that it would look like it had been outside a little bit, and then let that dry. And then I want to hot glue the twine string onto the pumpkin and hot glue the little banner onto the bow, and then I also hot glued the button onto the banner. And I thought that looked really cute. And that's all I wanted to do to it, except for trimming up some of the edges so that the edges of twine weren't sticking out everywhere. And I think it turned out really pretty. Simple, rustic, but also a little glamorous. So I really love it. Craft number 2 were these really easy Halloween votive candle holders. So these were super easy. I just took some baby food jars, some Mod Podge, mixed the Mod Podge with some acrylic paint in orange, purple, and green. And then I realized you only need a little bit of Mod Podge to make a good amount of this mix. And you really don't need very much color. So I was sort of looking for a stained glass effect, so that's why I mixed it with the Mod Podge. Plus, I'm going to cover it with this really fine glitter afterwards. So I thought the Mod Podge would help get it to stick. And then I just painted the jars. So you can see I left the lids on, but I am expecting to take the lids off later. I figured this way I would have an easy way to hold the jars without getting Mod Podge and acrylic paint and glitter all over my fingers. The only thing you have to watch out for is that the lids could stick later, but it's actually easy to get them off, kind of like you just have to whack them with something, and they came right off later. So I started with the orange, and then I did a green one, and then I did a purple one. Traditional Halloween, witchy colors, I think. Now, I happen to use a very, very, very fine glitter. It was almost like sand. I don't think I would recommend the very fine glitter. They would look more sparkly with the next step up of glitter, but they still turned out pretty cute. So once the Mod Podge and acrylic paint had dried, I just patted on a pretty thick layer of Mod Podge on top so that the glitter and paint won't chip off if they get bumped. Once that layer of Mod Podge dried, I took the lids off, and then I painted the very top around where the lid had been with just acrylic paint to give it a little contrast. Once the paint dried, I just put in some tea light candles. LEDs would be perfect, but I didn't have any, so I used regular, but I thought they turned out pretty cute and something nice to set on a table. So craft number 3 is this cute little decoupaged wooden sign. So first I took some Halloween fabric that I had and this piece of scrap wood that my husband had left over from some project. I gave the wood some sanding so that it was fairly smooth, but not really smooth. You could also easily use one of the pre-made pieces of wood from one of the hobby stores. And this piece was probably a 4x6. And then I painted it black. Now I did a decent coat, but not super thick coat of the paint, because I know once I do the decoupage part, you're not really going to be able to see any flaws. But I made sure that it was reasonably covering the all the wood. And while the paint was drying, I took this really fun Halloween fabric that I have and cut out some of the little sayings on it. So this is probably a fat quarter that I picked up at Joann Fabrics in their sale bin. And I just thought it was so adorable and has all kind of things like Halloween and spooky, eek, and these little ghosts and little skeletons. So then I cut out a few that I thought would look cute on the sign. And I just cut around each of them and left a little bit of the black on there. And once I had enough cut out to sort of cover the sign and the paint was dry, I just laid out how I thought I would like to see them. Next step was to take some Mod Podge and spread it over the whole piece of wood. I was thinking with the fabric it'd be a lot easier to do it this way than to try to do it any other way. And that way I can just sort of tap down on the fabric in the places that I want to put it. So once that was done, I started putting the pieces of fabric where I had laid them out earlier. And I just tapped them so that no little edges stuck up. Now, of course, some of the Mod Podge got on my fingers and it was a little stickier, of course, than you think. But I managed to get them all down where I wanted them. And once they're all down, the last step is to dab on some more Mod Podge so they stick really good and there's a good coating on top of them so they can't get scraped off. And you can see I'm doing it pretty thick because I didn't want the pieces of fabric to move, and some of them moved anyway, but it's pretty easy to get them to just dab very carefully. And that's all it took to make this cute little sign. Super spooky. So the last craft, number 4, is this adorable little Halloween gnome. Now, I'm not a very good painter, but if I can make an adorable little gnome, I think anybody can make an adorable little gnome. So the first thing I did was take a piece of MDF, I believe it is, or particle board. You could also just do a piece of wood that my husband had cut out for me a few years ago, and I painted it black. So once the black paint dried, I started painting the gnome. And I started off with just some tan acrylic paint. And I made his nose. And I made his feet. And I made his beard. And I just did the basic shape for the beard. And then I sort of swirled the paint around to get an interesting beard effect. And I did his body and his hat just in orange for Halloween. And again, I just did a sort of a swirly thing for his hat. I decided to make him look slightly like a wizard. Now you can see that the one coat of paint is actually a little thin. So I did a thicker sort of coat of paint, but then I also filled in later with a little more paint so that it would be a little thicker. One thing I thought would be fun to make it look a little more Halloween colored is I gave him some balloons. And I made the balloon string out of the same tan as his nose. And then I just put a big blob and sort of spread it out to make the balloons. Now, if I had more artistic ability, I would have made the balloons look like pumpkins. But I felt like I was challenged enough just making balloon shapes, so that's what I did. And at this point, the white beard was fairly dry, so I added some hands out of the same tan. Earlier I said I made his feet out of tan, but I didn't. I used actually brown to make a little more contrast with the orange and his hands. And then I filled in his beard a little bit more to make it look rounder than his body. So some of this was just making it up as I went along and deciding what I liked and didn't like as I was painting him. So then filling in the hat to make it look a little thicker and actually like fabric. And I filled in the beard too. And then I let everything dry thoroughly. So now I decided to add some dots to his hat to make it look more, I guess, wizardy. So it's a wizard gnome here. And I added black and white and purple dots. I didn't have any pattern in mind. I just wanted to make it look like they were spread out. And I just did it until it made me happy. So at this point, I thought his hat looked pretty cool, except final few finishing touches of dots. So then I took a little bit of orange paint and just sort of brushed some along the edges to give it a little contrast, since it's all black along there. The last thing I did was add some stars and the moon to the top part of the sign. I thought that would make it look more Halloween-y as well. So everything I did was freehand and just sort of went as I liked. and thought of a couple new things like the moon at the end and the stars. So there wasn't really, I had some inspiration, but I didn't really have a pattern of any sort. But you certainly could find plenty of inspiration and patterns if you just Google Halloween gnomes. That's where I got my first few thoughts from. And here's how he turned out. Pretty cute. I mean, not perfect, but definitely looks like I made him, so I hope you enjoyed this, and if you did, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and to like it, subscribe, all that stuff. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.